Hello guys, my name is Nash. Welcome to Thursday Tales of Terror. TTT. So for today's case, it is going to be my first unsolved crime story that I'm going to be talking about. If you're a Singaporean, you would most likely be aware of the Tan family murders, also known as the Geylang Bahru Family Murders. It's a very sad case and it has remained unsolved till today. 42 years have passed and sometimes unsolved crime news get trended and it will get you thinking like, how did the murderer even get away with such a heinous crime? Please stay till the end of the video because there are new updates to this case. Someone had actually come forward with new information and revealed some details, and these new details come as a surprise for me. I'll be sharing some theories as well, so please do stay tuned till the very end. Just a little summary of the story before I properly dived in detail about today's case. The Geylang Bahru family murders happened on the 6th of January 1979. All four children in the Tan family were found dead in their flat at Block 58, Geylang Bahru. They were apparently hacked and slashed to death and their bodies were left piled on top of each other. I cannot imagine the amount of pain the children had to go through before they died and how fearful and scared they must have been. The murder victims were so very young, 4 children ranging from ages 5 to 10. Here's the background of the Tan family. Their family consists of the parents and the 4 children. Their father Tan Kuen Chai, who was 38, and their mother Lee Mei Ying, who was 30. Their 4 children, Tan Kok Peng, age 10, Tan Kok Hin, age 8, Tan Kok Sin, age 6, and the only daughter Tan Chin Ni, age 5. They all live in a one-bedroom HDB flat which was on the 4th floor at Block 58 of Geylang Bahru. They were known to be a very happy family. They were very close to each other. They were just a really nice family and nobody seemed to have any problems or issues with them. Their parents loved their children very much and their small apartment had photos of their children everywhere. The 3 boys attended Bendemeer Primary School while their youngest child, the only girl, was still in kindergarten. Their parents owned a minibus which they operated together to send other children to school. The small business was their main source of income. Because their work consisted of them having to pick up children from different locations and sending them to school, the parents had to get up very early to start their work day. The Tan's children were so well behaved and sensible. They would get themselves up and get ready for school on their own. So on the morning of January 6, 1979, just like any other working day, the parents got up early to get ready for work. They kissed their children goodbye at 6 a.m. and left for work at 6:35 a.m. while all 4 children were still soundly asleep. As usual, Mrs. Tan gave a call to her children to wake them up for school at 7:10 a.m. but there were no answers. Nobody was picking up the phone. Mrs. Tan called for another 2 more times but still no answers. Mrs. Tan then ended up calling one of the neighbours and asked them to help wake the children up by knocking on the door so that they can get ready for school, and the neighbour did just that. They went and they knocked on the door at around 8 a.m. but also received no responses. They then walked away. At this point, nobody was ever going to think that the children would be dead inside. At around 10 a.m. that morning, Mr. and Mrs. Tan got home from work, and that was when Mrs. Tan unfortunately discovered the gruesome side of her children who had been murdered in the bathroom. All 4 of her children's bodies were stacked on top of each other on the bathroom's floor. The 4 children were found in t-shirts and pants and all 4 had slash wounds on their head. Each child reportedly had a minimum of 20 slash wounds to their faces and bodies. The 5-year-old girl Chinny appeared to have taken the majority of the slash wounds to her face. It seems like their eldest child Kok Peng might have gotten into a bit of a struggle with the killer because claps in his right hands were several strands of long hair believed to be the killer's, and his right arm was almost severed. The hair that Kok Peng was clenching could have been a piece of evidence, but somehow I couldn't get any further details on this anywhere. There are several possibilities. The hair could have been tested by the police for any DNA matches but no results, or they didn't test them. But I highly doubt so that the police would let such an important piece of evidence not get tested, so I'm guessing the hair got lost somewhere when the bodies were transported. Mrs. Tan cried to the point where she was about to faint. Meanwhile, her neighbour immediately rang the police. Now, the police concluded that the murders were premeditated and that the killer or killers had taken care to avoid leaving incriminating evidence. However, there were blood stains in the kitchen sink and the killer or killers were believed to have cleaned themselves before leaving the flat. There was no evidence of forced entry, and I believe there are several possibilities. Number one, the killer could be someone close to the family, and therefore, when they knock on the door, the kids could have let them in due to familiar faces. Number two, they could have entered the flat with a key that was reportedly lost by Mrs. Tan around that period of time. Note that the locks were not changed despite the loss of the key. Number three, someone, most likely the killer, could have stolen the key since this was a highly likely premeditated murder. If you think about it, she could have lost the key anywhere. How would a random person know that this key that had been found was for this particular apartment? The possibility is just very, very low. Ironically, on that day itself, one of the neighbours, a granny who usually sits outside the flat along the common passageway to watch the residents' children play, was washing her hair that morning. I would have most probably seen anyone coming out of the Tan's flat had I not washed my hair that morning, said the granny. She also further described the 4 children as very lovely and obedient, and they always visited her. Now, it does seem to me that the killers were very much aware of the timing that they could enter the flat and the timing that they needed to leave, for the fact that these murders took place so soon after the parents had left. And bear in mind that it was such a small time frame in which they could have happened. Let's look back at the timeline. So at 6:35 a.m, the parents left for work, and at 7:10 a.m, they called the children, but there was no response. And at 8 a.m, that's when the neighbours went over to knock on the door to try and wake the children up. So I would think between this timing, the children had already been killed, or the murders were still happening while these phone calls were being made. The flat was, however, not ransacked, nor were there any items reported missing either. The murder weapons, believed to be a chopper taken from the kitchen of the flat, as well as a dagger, were not found, and they have never been recovered. Now, this also goes to show that the killer seems to know their way around the house, because in most situations, murderers normally bring their own weapons and then they dispose it somewhere else. But this murderer seemed to know that the Tan family have a chopper and a dagger in the kitchen. The investigation into the murders was conducted by the Criminal Investigation Department's Special Investigations Section. They did not establish a definitive motive, but acknowledged the possibility of the killings being motivated by revenge. Mrs. Tan's brother actually told the media that the murders could have been related to an illegal tontine scheme that Mr. and Mrs. Tan might have been involved in. If you're not aware of the tontine scheme, a tontine scheme usually comprises a few members. One member will act as a banker to conduct the monthly meetings and record every transaction that occurred, and the rest of the members are subscribers. In short, each of them will put in a bunch of money or monetary assets into this pool, and you get shares from it over a period of time. And whoever dies last in this group gets to keep everything that was put into it. Police then pursued the possibility of the killer being a discontented gambler. However, that angle of investigation did not lead to the murderer, and the Tans told the media that they had not offended anyone. In my opinion, this tontine scheme doesn't really affect anything, because if anyone wanted to harm somebody because of this tontine scheme, it would be the parents and not the children. Even if you kill the children, you don't get more shares unless you kill someone in that group. So it doesn't really make sense that the tontine scheme might be the reason why the murderers would kill the children. Now, the parents also told the media that they couldn't think of anyone who would do such a heinous crime, as they didn't offend anybody at all. They had no enemies, and they had not upset or offended anyone, especially to the point of having all 4 of their children murdered. 2 weeks had passed and there were still no new leads into this case. However, the parents received a Chinese New Year card around that period of time, which may or may not have been a hoax. The card showed happy children at play and taunted them with the words, "Now you can have no more offspring, ha ha ha," and was signed "The Murderer" in Mandarin. It was strongly believed that the sender of the card also appeared to have intimate knowledge of the family, as they addressed the Tans by their nicknames, Ah Chai and Ah Eng. And this statement that was written in the card, "Now you can have no more offspring, ha ha ha," further proves that this murderer is highly likely someone really close to them as suspected before, or someone that is very familiar with the Tan's family background, because Mrs. Tan actually had a fertility operation or a sterilization surgery following the birth of their daughter, and this is not something you would want to broadcast to the world. It has to be someone that they felt that they were comfortable with enough to be able to confide in this person about the surgery. Due to the lack of advanced forensic technology in Singapore in the 1970s, the fingerprint on the card could not be tested and traced back to the sender. The letter just kind of solidified the fact that they were looking for someone that the family knew very well. On 7 January 1979, homicide investigators questioned two women in connection to the murders, but later released them, not commenting if the women were of any help. There were really no more information on this woman. I couldn't find anything else. Now, the police interviewed over 100 people, the parents themselves, the neighbours and relatives, and even public appeals for witnesses. Police sources also said that several of the witnesses were being re-interviewed to clarify certain points. The police, however, had difficulties obtaining useful information. There were a lot of hoaxes, a lot of fake statements. There was even this witness who told a Chinese newspaper that he saw a couple, one of them bloodstained, leaving the scene of the murder, but police investigations later revealed it to be a hoax. Residents in the area also claimed the witness had seen the daughter Chinny struggling with a man from his flat in another block, but the witness, however, could not be located. On the 15th of January 1979, according to the Straits Times, the police denied the report that Kok Peng was holding on to strands of hair in his hand. There was no truth in the report, and Kok Peng never had strands of hair in his hand. So my question is, which exactly was the real report? Was there strands of hair or not? The police, however, did receive one good lead from a taxi driver. Now, a taxi driver from Toa Payoh later reported that a man in his 20s who walked with a lurch, he was basically walking unsteadily, had boarded his taxi near Block 96 along Geylang Bahru Road. He boarded the taxi at about 8 a.m. that morning. The taxi driver said that the man had blood stain on the left side of his body, and he had carried a knife that banged against the taxi door when he alighted at Lavender Street. After the parents were informed on this piece of lead by the police, they seemed to have an idea immediately to who he was. Mr. Tan matched the taxi driver's description to a neighbour of his, a young man who visited the family's flat almost daily to use their phone, and who was known as Uncle to the whole family. In a police lineup, the taxi driver picked out the neighbour as the man who had boarded his taxi. However, the uncle was released after 2 weeks due to a lack of evidence connecting him to the murders. This man, by far in my opinion, is the likely killer because he fits all the description. He was picked out of a lineup, he was seen with bloodstains and a knife, he was close to the family and would often go inside the apartment to use the phone, which goes to show that he was familiar with the apartment and the kids. The man, who was Malaysian, later moved out of Block 58 with his sister and has never been heard from since. The children were then buried at Choa Chu Kang Cemetery on 7 January 1979 together with their school bags, books and toys. The parents kept some of their children's belongings as a form of memory. It was truly devastating for them, and Mrs. Tan passed out several times as the children were being placed in their respective coffins. Both Mr. and Mrs. Tan stopped working and they gave up their minibus operation, dropping children off in their school bus because it was really very difficult for them. I could not concentrate on my driving because I kept thinking of them, said Mr. Tan. Also, for the sake of the school children, they gave up because they didn't want to endanger them as well. They soon found work at a plastic bag machining firm. A year after the gruesome murders, the Tans were featured in the Straits Times and referred to their home as 4 walls of emptiness. Their yearning for having children around them again made the couple registered with the Social Welfare Department, hoping to adopt 2 children, preferably a boy and a girl. Eventually, Mrs. Tan underwent a sterilization reversal operation and was able to conceive again. It was truly a miracle because it was really unheard of. She had actually asked a few doctors, but they could not help until she met Dr. T.H. Lin. She went to him in 1981 with hardly any hope of being pregnant again. On 30th December 1983, at the age of 35, she gave birth to a baby boy. So some theories that I found online that I would like to share, and I feel that is the most likely possible scenario to happen. Number 1, Mrs. Tan had an affair with the uncle, and that uncle killed the children after Mrs. Tan's reluctance to leave her family for him. Number 2, a relative of Mrs. Tan had asked her to buy lottery tickets, which eventually won. The prize money was $45,000, today's equivalent of $97,000. However, Mrs. Tan told him that she had forgotten to buy the tickets. It is said that the relative knew that Mrs. Tan was withholding the prize money and killed the children in an act of vengeance before fleeing the country. In a similar theory, it was uncle who had asked Mrs. Tan to buy the tickets. People in the area, including Mr. and Mrs. Tan, allegedly knew it was uncle who murdered the children, but kept quiet as he was part of a street gang. And this brings me back to that granny's testimony, and maybe that's why the granny had to lie that she washed her hair on that day, because she didn't want to be targeted. It was also said that Mr. and Mrs. Tan were also involved in drug activities and do not want it to be exposed by uncle. Because drug activities in Singapore, if it's very serious, it would lead to a death penalty, even up till today. Now, all these theories have been denied by the couple themselves, so we're not very sure if it's true or not. Now, in April this year, 2021, Crime Library Singapore was reached by an old neighbour of the family to provide some new details on the case. Just a little background on who is Crime Library Singapore. I've been following them for very long, and I'm very impressed by their work and the amount of effort they put in to help so many people. So basically, Crime Library Singapore, also known as CLS, is a non-profit organization. Their organization's mission is to assist their help seekers and to promote crime awareness and prevention to members of the public. Incorporated in year 2000, their forte includes appeal for witnesses in murder cases, appeal for witnesses in cold cases, finding missing persons, and finding biological family members. Here are some details that they have gotten while doing a charity drive to raise awareness on unsolved cases and crime prevention. So number 1, the scene of the crime is not at level 4 at block 58 as reported by the 1979 news articles. The crime scene is actually located at level 5. Number 2, Mrs. Tan, whose name is Lee Mei Ying, is not Lee Mei Ying. I know, her true name is Lee MC, and she's not locally born. I can't believe that such a basic information can be let out to the public wrongly. It is just... I just have no words for this. Lastly, neighbours of the Tan family held crucial information not revealed to the police. Now, while the new information provided by the CLS could not be verified, it has rekindled hopes of solving the crime 42 years later. Xinmin Daily News tracked down Mrs. Tan, now in her 70s and living with her grandson. Her husband has been deceased for a long time, she said. Unfortunately, the murders couldn't be solved before he passed on. When she was informed that the investigation had resumed, she remained silent for a long time, tears brimming in her eyes. Although she wasn't willing to talk about the past any longer, she nodded when asked if she hopes the case can be solved, and said she'll leave the case to the police. The trauma might never leave Mrs. Tan for as long as she lives, but if there's one thing that can be done now, it is to find the murderer. We all know that it's very difficult to find the murderer after so many years, especially for this one. It has been 42 years. We are not even sure if the murderer is still alive. Mrs. Tan and everyone who knew the children deserve to have closure and justice. So we have come to an end for today's story of the Geylang Bahru Family Murders. And I do believe that one of the theories that I mentioned earlier is highly likely, possibly true. I really think it is the uncle and the sister. I'm not sure why there were conflicting reports about the long strands of hair, but you know, if there is hair, I would conclude that it belongs to the uncle's sister. If there is no hair, then it will just be uncle. I don't even know if uncle can be traced back or if uncle is still dead or alive right now, but I really do hope that we all could find closure together in this. If you like the way I tell stories, please do give me a like, share the video, and subscribe to my channel. So I'll see you next Thursday with another story. Thank you, and I'll see you. Bye.